The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your skin prickle. Like the walls were whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I stood in the dim living room, my flashlight cutting through the shadows, the beam trembling slightly in my hand. The air smelled stale, like old laundry and something sweet. Burnt sugar, maybe? There was something rancid under the sweet smell, a strong scent reminiscent of rotten eggs. It made my stomach turn. Martha Ellis sat on the couch, her hands collapsed tightly in her lap. She was calm, too calm. Her dark hair fell onto her face as she looked up at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. "You're sure you haven't seen her?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. I've been through this before. Missing kid, panicked mother, neighbors with too many opinions and not enough answers. But this one felt different. It felt wrong. She shook her head slowly, her lips curling into a faint, almost rehearsed smile. "I told you, officer, I haven't seen Dawn. I don't know where she is." Her voice was soft, almost soothing, like she was trying to lull me into complacency. She gestured towards the hallway. "You can look again if you want. I've got nothing to hide." I glanced at my partner, Officer Harris. He was standing by the door, his jaw tight, his hands resting on his holster. We've already searched the apartment once. A quick, cursory sweeps of the rooms. Nothing out of the ordinary, but Harris's eyes were scanning the room like he was piecing a puzzle together, and I trusted his instincts. Both of us could sense that something was off here. "We'll take another look," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. The hallway was narrow, the walls closing in as we moved deeper into the apartment. The bedroom was small and cluttered with clothes and toys that didn't seem to belong to a 38-year-old woman. My flashlight swept across the room, the beam catching on a closet door. It was slightly ajar, the darkness inside swallowing the light. I reached for the handle, my fingers brushed against the cold metal. Behind me, Harris shifted, his breath shallow. The air felt heavier now, like the room was holding its breath. The door creaked open. At first, I thought it was empty. Just a few coats hanging limply, a stack of boxes in the corner. But then I saw it. A small movement, a flicker of light reflecting off wide, terrified eyes. "Dawn?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. The girl was curled up in a corner, her knees pulled to her chest. Her face was pale, her dark hair tangled. She looked up at me, her lips trembling, as if she was afraid to speak. She had some beads around her neck, of various colors, and it looked like someone had made her wear a bracelet full of chicken feathers. The whole thing screamed occult. "It's okay," I said, my voice softening. "We're here to take you home." Behind me, Harris radioed for backup, his voice sharp and urgent. I reached out, helping Dawn to her feet. She was shaking, her small hand clutching mine like a lifeline. She stepped out of the closet, Martha standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt charged, like the calm before the storm. When Harris moved, his handcuffs glinted in the dim light. "Martha Ellis," he said, his voice cold. "You are under arrest." She didn't resist. She just stood there, her expression blank, as if she'd been expecting this all along. I watched as Harris led her away, my mind racing. What kind of person hides a child in their closet? What kind of game was she playing? And what the ritualistic was she planning to do with those beads and the chicken feathers? Dawn clung to me as we stepped outside, the cold night air biting at our skin. The flashing lights of the patrol cars painted the streets in red and blue, and I could see Dawn's mother running towards us, her face streaked with tears. "Thank you," she sobbed, pulling Dawn into her arms. "Thank you so much." I nodded, my throat tight. I glanced back at the apartment. The windows dark and empty. The case was far from over. Martha would have to answer for what she'd done. But for now, at least, Dawn was safe. And that was enough.
One Friday night last summer, I was home alone while my family, besides my sister who was at work, stayed at the cabin. I'm used to staying home alone as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially when I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, since I'm used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him. Plus, if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. He's the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the doors or windows. So, the sound of his barks at nearly midnight were concerning. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I left where I slept in the basement and walked upstairs to check it out. As I'd suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I had let Bosco, the dog's name, out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I'm a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and things like that, so I would never while home alone forget to close the door, and I'm 100% certain of that. I figured Bosco did his job, and the intruder was scared away upon opening the door and seeing the dog right there barking at him. I closed and locked the door, double-checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease. Upon finding nothing, I went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walked around for about 10 minutes before I put my earphones in and talked myself down until I could fall asleep. At about 2 a.m. that same night, my sister came home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement whining at my door. He's not supposed to be in the basement. There's even a gate to stop him from getting to the basement. When I got up to let him outside, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him back in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs, and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door being ajar, busy with work for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until a few days later. My sister and mom were home with me for a movie night. I remembered the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up. She said that same night, an hour or so after she got home, she went to the kitchen and the door was open again. That same door that was locked from the inside and not opened since earlier that night. I couldn't believe it, and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away, saying that maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it until we both realized that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in and not steal anything and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked somebody in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of the house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there, now knowing that the house was not empty and there was also a dog who would bark at them if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly with when my sister would have found the door open once more. She said this time it was much wider than when I had found it, and this makes sense if they were in a hurry on the way out and didn't bother to close it. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I'm not fully sure why Bosco wasn't going crazy at the man the whole time. Maybe some treats were involved, or maybe he just calmed down and didn't worry about the intruder after he initially entered the house. It was so strange, especially with nothing from our house missing. but in this small town there have been many reports of break-ins. The other break-ins normally had nothing missing. It would be the same as what happened to us, literally only the break-in and entering part. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of somebody being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. This happened on the last day of college classes one year. I went to a large university in a pretty typical college town. I had a group of friends and lived with 2 other roommates, Sarah and Courtney, in an apartment. We had a lot of other friends in our friend group as well. So after we had all finished our finals on the last day of school, everybody was going out. I'm not really a huge drinker, so I never really have more than a couple of drinks on any occasion, but I still would go out with friends and have a good time. So that afternoon, when everybody was done with classes, we went to a friend's house to hang out. This went on into the night, and then we started going to bars. We went to one, and many other college students were there as well. It was fun, but as the night got later, things got crazier. It turned into a pretty classic college night out. The bars were crowded, almost everybody got drunk, and we ended up going to several different bars. People would hang out at one, then walk to another nearby one. It was hard to keep track of where everybody was. Some of my friends were still at the previous bar, most were at the current one that I was at, and some went to another. Once it got past midnight, a few people started to go home. I was hanging out and talking to some people at one of the bars where I think most of my friends were. I know that Sarah was there, but Courtney had gone to another one. I heard that some people were at a different bar, and I liked that one better, so I decided to walk there. It wasn't that far away, and as I was going there, I got a phone call. I looked and saw that it was from Courtney. I had not seen her in a while, and I wondered what she was doing, so I answered the phone. When I did, she said, "Help." She sounded very upset. Then she asked if I could come and get her. I asked what was wrong, and then she hung up the phone. Now, I knew that Courtney had been a little bit drunk, so I was concerned for her, and I tried to call her back because I didn't know where she was. When I called her though, she did not answer. Then she sent me a text which was her location. I put it in my GPS, and it was about a 10-minute walk from where I was, so I decided to go there. I didn't recognize the place. It was not a bar, but it appeared to be a house. I walked there by myself, which definitely was a bad idea, but I wasn't with anybody at the time. So when I got there, it was a dark and quiet street, but it looked like a pretty typical college neighborhood. A lot of smaller, older houses, all pretty close to one another. I saw where her location was, and it was inside of the house. I didn't know who lived there, so I didn't know why Courtney would be there. Now I was feeling pretty nervous. I walked up to the front door, and in doing so, I noted that all the lights in the house appeared off. Could this have been a mistake? I tried calling her again, but was sent directly to voicemail immediately. When I got to the door, I saw that it was already open. I looked inside the front door and pushed it open a little. It creaked, but I heard nothing inside. There were no noises of anybody talking or anything. It was almost like the house looked abandoned. I stood there in the doorway looking and listening for a good minute or so. I just felt like it was a bad idea to walk inside, but Courtney was supposedly in there and I needed to help her. Then I suddenly heard footsteps. I saw a male figure walking through the darkness inside. He was very quickly walking straight for me. I just turned around and sprinted away from there. I ran off out of the yard and into the street and then across the street. I heard the guy going out of the doorway and starting to run after me. I cut through the neighbor's property across the street and I even hopped the fence. Then I went to the next street over and ran down it for a while. By that point, I felt like I had lost the guy. I didn't hear him, and when I looked around, I didn't see him either. I wasted no time and I dialed 911. I told them of what happened and I thought that my friend needed help. So I waited there, and about 10 minutes later, a police car arrived. He went to the house and then knocked on the door. A while later, Courtney came to the door crying. I was glad to see her again. I found out all the crazy details a short time later. She said that a guy at the bar had been talking to her. Somehow he convinced her to let him give her a ride to another bar. But he didn't go to another bar. Instead, he drove to the house. Then another guy was there and they forced her to go inside. They would not let her leave and forced her to call me and tell me to go there too. The guys then sent the location text to me and took her phone away from her. She was held in one of the rooms against her will and thankfully not harmed, but was threatened. I guess they had seen me with her and wanted us both. What the plan was after I got there, I guess, was to make me go inside and kidnap us. It came awfully close to happening, but I'm glad that it didn't. After I got away, both guys left the house. However, they did not return. The men ended up being located and caught a while later. The house was not theirs, but belonged to a friend who had just moved out. It was such a crazy experience. I'm very happy that Courtney is okay and that I did not go into that house. I worked the late night shift for a while as an EMT on an ambulance that does both 911 calls and generic transport in Southern California. For this call one night, my partner and I, both females, took a lady back home from the ER. She lived in a kind of sketchy neighborhood, and after dropping her off, we drove down a block away from the known Hooker and Pimp Street so that we could finish our paperwork and clean equipment away from that street. We were parked opposing traffic on a curb in the ghetto suburbs at 1 a.m. I had just finished cleaning, and I was standing at the passenger side with the door open. My partner was seated in the passenger seat, still finishing her report. All of a sudden, we heard a girl's voice from a few doors behind us screaming, "No, no, let me go," while a guy yelled, "You can't take her." My partner and I looked at each other, then down the road, because we heard someone's engine revving like an angry lawnmower. All I saw was headlights coming my way, and I took a flying leap into the cab across my partner's lap as she slammed the door shut behind me. Just in the nick of time, too, because the car came within literally inches of our rig. I'd have been crushed if I didn't have the reflexes to jump in. As the car went by, we saw that a bald, tatted-up Hispanic guy was the driver, and he was just casually flicking a cigarette out the window. In the back seat was a girl in her underwear desperately pounding on the window. Meanwhile, on the outside of the car was a dude in his tighty-whities. He had one hand holding onto the roof rack or something, and his feet braced up against the door while he was also punching the window. Not a scene that you see every day. I flicked on the lights and sirens, hoping to scare the driver, and my partner got on the radio telling dispatch a brief rundown and to send cops to our location as we were GPS tracked. The driver was not fazed in the least by our display. He stopped at the four-way stop sign, which was a bit surprising, looked at us in his mirror, flicked the cigarette, and took off. Naturally, we two unarmed females gave chase. The driver was cruising, weaving this way and that, trying to shake the guy hanging on in his underpants. We saw the dude fall off and run after the car, and a moment later the girl came flying out of the car in a very ungraceful tuck and roll. The two took off on foot behind one of those giant powered breakers you sometimes see on city streets, while the driver floored it around a corner. We followed around the corner ourselves to try to get a plate number, but alas, he was sporting on advertisements on the plates that a newly purchased car would have. Since he was gone, we presumed that it was safe to get out and do our job and take care of those injured. We hopped out with the aid bag, and my partner kept watch while I ran to the giant power thing, but the nearly naked duo was gone. At that moment, 5 squad cars pulled up, and we gave them the story. They asked where the two were who escaped the car, and we responded that we didn't know. They asked for a description and possible direction, so we told them that if they went left and made another left 3 streets down, where they first parked, they might find them. Maybe 5 minutes later, one of the cops radioed in saying that he found them. Here's the thing though, they denied everything. No car, no kidnapping, no chase. They said none of it happened. Of course, they couldn't explain why they were nearly a block away from their place wearing only underwear. They also couldn't explain their lack of shoes or the large amount of road rash all over them. Since technically they didn't do anything wrong, they had no desire to press charges or be treated by us, and they were let go. That was the night I learned some not only scary but just flat out weird stuff can happen late at night.
I should have known something was wrong when she ordered the same drink as me. Whiskey, neat, no ice. I should have figured it out when I saw the emptiness in her eyes. Her lips curled into a smile as she raised the glass. Her dark eyes locked onto mine. To new beginnings, she said, her voice smooth as silk. I clinked my glass against hers and took a sip. The whiskey burned going down, but it was a good burn, the kind that makes you feel alive. She watched me intently, her smile never wavering. Her name was Vivian, and she was one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. We met on a dating app, one of those swiping ones my daughter had insisted I'd try after my divorce. "You're too young to be alone, Dad," she said. I wasn't so sure, but Vivian made me feel like maybe she was right. Our first date was a little cozy bar downtown. She was elegant, sophisticated, and she listened to me like no one had in years. She asked about my job, my hobbies, my dreams. She made me feel interesting and important. By the third date, I was hooked. But then, things started to change. It was subtle at first. She'd cancel plans last minute, claiming work emergencies. She'd ask strange questions. How much I had in savings, where I kept my important documents, and what passwords I like to use. And stuff like that. I told myself she was just curious, and she cared. I was wrong. The night it happened, she invited me to her apartment. She cooked dinner, a rich, savory pasta that smelled incredible. We laughed, we talked, and for a moment, I forgot about the nagging doubts in the back of my head. "Try this," she said, handing me a glass of red wine. "It's my favorite." I took a sip. It was bitter, but I didn't want to be rude. I drank it all. The room started to spin. Vivian? I slurred, my vision blurring. She was standing over me, her smile gone, replaced by something cold, calculating. "Shh," she whispered, her voice like ice. "Just sleep." When I woke up, I was in a hotel room. The walls were bare, the air thick with the smell of mildew. My head pounded, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy, unresponsive. The door opened. Vivian walked in, and she was holding a syringe. "You're awake?" she said, her voice flat. "Good. We have work to do." I tried to speak, to ask her what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. She knelt beside me, her face inches from mine. "You're going to give me everything," she said, her breath hot against my ear. "Your money, your accounts, your life, and then, well, let's just say you won't be needing it anymore." I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't obey. She injected something into my arm, and the world went dark again. When I woke up the second time, I was in a hospital bed. A nurse was standing over me, her face etched with concern. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. "Someone found you in a ditch outside the city. You've been in a coma for weeks." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. "There's a detective here to see you," the nurse said, stepping aside. The detective was a tall man with a grim expression. He introduced himself as Agent Carter from the FBI. "We've been looking for Vivian for a long time," he said, pulling out a picture. "Her real name is Lucy Griner. She's been targeting men like you for years. You're the first one to survive. The other 3 men she was linked to all died, and she made off with all their belongings." I stared at the photo, my heart pounding. It was her. Vivian. Lucy. Whoever she was. "She's in custody now," said Carter, "but we need your help to make sure she never hurts anyone again." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I thought I'd found love. Instead, I found a predator, and I was lucky to have escaped with my life.
This story takes place several years ago now. At the time, I lived in an apartment by myself. I don't live there anymore and only lived in this particular place for 1 year. So it was a pretty decent apartment complex. The building was pretty new, probably less than 10 years old. It was clean for the most part and a nice place to live. Very shortly after I moved into my place is when this happened. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of the building. I was inside my place one night and it was getting pretty late. Things were quiet because of this, and out of nowhere I heard a knocking coming from the wall. This wall led to the apartment that was next to mine. I didn't know who lived there and had never seen them or anything. They knocked on the wall and then stopped, and then they knocked again. I had no idea why they would be knocking. It sounded very deliberate, not like they had bumped into the wall by accident or something. But I wasn't making any loud noises or anything. Things had been very quiet. I was confused. The knocking stopped for a short time, and then I heard it again. It was really strange. I thought about knocking back because I was kind of frustrated. I mean, I wasn't doing anything, and it was late at night. Why would they be knocking on the wall like that? Eventually, it stopped though, and I just let it go. By the next day, I forgot all about it. However, that night, it happened again, and I was reminded. The knocking started up right about at the same time as the previous night, if I had to guess. I didn't know what to make of this. Again, I wasn't being noisy at all, and nobody in the building seemed to be making a lot of noise, so it's not like they mistaked me for somebody being loud. It was very confusing. Like before, they knocked a few times on the wall and then stopped. Then, like a minute later, they knocked again. It was very strange. Eventually, again it stopped, and it was done for the night. The next day, I found out that the apartment next to mine was called a show unit. This means that nobody lives there, and when people get a tour of the apartment, they show them that one. That was even more confusing to me then, because that meant that nobody lived there. So why was I hearing knocking coming from that apartment very late at night? It was really strange. And that night, I heard it again. It was probably at around the same time as before. I wasn't looking at a clock, so I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing that it was. I was so curious about it, so this time I decided to investigate. I got up and walked out the front door of my apartment. I was now out in the hallway, and I walked towards the one next to mine. Things were very quiet, and nobody was out in the hallway at this hour. I approached the door to the apartment next to mine, and I noticed something. It was actually open. I couldn't really see inside, but the door was not shut all the way. It was resting against the door frame, but not closed. I walked closer to it, and then decided to open it further. I knew this was nobody's place, so nobody should be inside of it. When I pushed the door open, I saw all the lights inside were off, so I couldn't see who or if anybody was actually in there. It was really quiet as well. I started to take a step inside, and then I heard footsteps. They were far away, but inside of the apartment, and the footsteps were heading in my direction. I got so freaked out that I just turned around and left. I quickly walked out of the apartment and then back to mine. I went back in and locked the door behind me. Probably 10 seconds after I was back in my place, I heard footsteps out in the hallway. Then they went right up to my door and somebody tried opening it. I was so creeped out by this point. After attempting to enter my place, they did not knock, but I heard them walking away. I went to the door and looked out, but they were gone by then. It was very strange. After that night, I never heard any more knocking coming from there. I still don't know who it was or why they were doing it. I went to a university that was about an hour away from home. I lived in the dorms for my freshman year and my sophomore year as well. This takes place at the end of my sophomore year. On the last day of school, my plan was to drive back home, because we were supposed to move out of the dorms by the following day anyways, and because I only lived about an hour away. It was doable, and my roommate had packed up all her stuff and she moved out like right after finals were done. I didn't really have that much stuff at college with me. Pretty much just my basic things like clothes and school supplies, as well as some other stuff. I spent some time with college friends in the afternoon, and then went back to the dorm in the evening. I began packing my stuff, which I should have done earlier, but it didn't really take that long. By the time I was done, I started bringing everything out to my car in the dorm parking lot. It was around sunset at this time, so the parking lot was quiet and mostly empty now. As I was carrying boxes and other things into my car, I was on like my third or fourth trip to the car. I was struggling with some large boxes, and this random guy came up to me seemingly out of nowhere. He looked much older than most college students, and he asked to help me with the boxes. He took one, and I said thanks, and he put it in my car. The man then asked me where I was going. I said that I was moving out of the dorms and going home. He told me that he also went to the college. I believed him because even though he was older, people of any age can go to college. He stood around as I put the boxes in my car, but he didn't say anything else. Then I said that I was going to get more stuff. He asked if I needed help, and I said no thanks. So then the guy started to walk away. I went back up, got more stuff, and then came back out. When I got to my car again, I saw the man. He was standing far away at the other end of the parking lot, almost out of sight. He was standing sort of next to a car. I put my stuff in and then had one more trip to make. By that point, my car was loaded up with stuff. I went back and then brought my final stuff out and noticed that the guy was still in the same spot in the parking lot. He then got inside of the car that he was by over there. Before leaving, I went back into my dorm room to clean it. We were supposed to leave the room clean, and I didn't want to get in trouble. That didn't take me too long though, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Then I left the dorms and went back to my car again. When I was getting into my car, I noticed that the guy's car was still there, and he appeared to be inside of it now. So then I texted my parents that I was leaving, and then I started driving back home. The exit to the dorm parking lot was on the other end, and I had to drive right by the guy in his car. I remember that right after pulling out, I saw him leave and pull onto the road behind me. I found this odd because he had been sitting there for such a long time for some reason. I drove off campus and then went through the town to the highway. The entire time, the guy stayed behind me. When he got onto the highway after me, I started to get worried about it. What if he was deliberately following me for some reason? I didn't want to think that that was a possibility, but what else was I supposed to make of it? I drove down the highway, which I would be driving down pretty much the whole way home. After I went for a good 30 minutes, I was getting much closer to being back, and the guy was still right behind me. By that point, I was really concerned. I saw a sign for a rest stop up ahead, so I decided to go there. If he followed me there, then there would be no mistaking that he was deliberately following me. I nervously took the exit, and the man behind me did the same. That's when I started freaking out. I pulled into a parking space, and the man parked like 2 or 3 spaces away from me. I didn't get out of my car, but I took out my phone and called my dad. I told him what was happening. Meanwhile, the man stayed in his car and did not get out, as I did the same. My dad answered, and when I told him what was happening, he told me to look up directions to the nearest police station and drive straight there. So I did just that, and then left the rest stop. As soon as I did, the man left as well. He followed me all the way to the police station, but he did not go into the parking lot when I did. He drove away instead. I parked in the police station lot for a while. I saw a cop, and I told him what happened. He was nice and offered to follow me back to the highway, which was only like a mile away from there. So I drove back and didn't see the guy. I got back on the highway and then made it home safely. I never saw that guy again. I'm pretty sure that he didn't even attend my college. I work a graveyard shift as a security guard for a recycling yard. When I was new to this job, only my second week of working there, I was given a good scare one night. Basically, every hour I make rounds across a giant recycling yard covered in various precious metals that are broken down and sold. During my shift, I scan various checkpoints and ensure nobody besides me is in the yard or facility. One of my other tasks is to go through some grassy and bushy terrain and over a set of train tracks to take a photo of a warehouse far across. This is to ensure that it is safe and clear. I use a flashlight with 2000 lumens, so I can see my way through pretty much the entire yard. Well, that one night during my second week, just an hour in on my first round, I went through the grass and over the train tracks. I took the picture of the warehouse and submitted it. Suddenly, I got this intense feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up and I froze. My flashlight was still on and pointed at the warehouse. I slowly turned around and pointed my flashlight behind me. About 10 yards away, I saw a skinny, old, wrinkled white man with a large white beard sitting on a chair. He was looking directly at me. He had dirty jean overalls and I think a Western-style cowboy fedora hat on. Under the overalls, the only thing I could see was his bare skin, no other clothes. Now, I'm a 6 foot 220-pound man, but he scared the crap out of me when I turned and saw him. I screamed at a pitch that was probably embarrassing, and I accidentally dropped my flashlight out of shock. Mind you, there were thin, tiny metal shards literally everywhere on the ground where I was standing. I couldn't see anything now as the flashlight was facing away from my sight and not towards the man in the chair. All I heard was a quick pace of shuffling and the clanging of metal from footsteps quickly running towards me. Once the metal-crunching footsteps were within maybe 5 feet of me, I heard them quickly veer to the left and past me. Within 3 or 4 seconds, the metal clanging was gone, followed by the faraway sound of rustling bushes. I finally, carefully to avoid cutting myself on shards, grabbed my flashlight from the ground and pointed it towards the sound. The old man was gone, past the bushes to who knows where. I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. I managed to catch my breath and called several emergency contacts. When they arrived, the old man was long gone. I believe that maybe he was just there to watch the active trains move across. I say this because the metal chair was facing the tracks. It's still there, and I took a photo of it, kind of as a memento to remember the time an old man scared the living daylights out of me. I've not seen the old man since, but maybe he still comes and sits on the chair, but is more careful about it. This happened back when I was in college. I was a freshman and living in the freshman dorms. It was a large dorm building and my floor was all female. I had my own dorm room, which was very nice because I didn't have to share it with a roommate. Other than the little bit of extra space though, it was a pretty typical college dorm room. The university that I went to was large and I quickly made a good number of friends. It became a normal routine for me to spend time with my new college friends quite a bit. We would do homework and study together and hang out on the weekends. Sometimes I would go to parties with them or sports games and things like that. One weekend, I was with my friends until really late at night. I hadn't even been drinking, but I stayed out until like 2 a.m. I got back to my dorm room and was so tired that I pretty much went right to sleep. And in doing so, I forgot to lock the door to my room. The next thing that I knew, I was waking up sometime later in the night. When I awoke, I saw that it was still completely dark out. But the very next instant, I heard that my door was opening. That brought in a little bit of light, and I saw what appeared to be a man standing in the doorway. He appeared to be looking at me, but in the lighting I only really saw a silhouette mostly. But even with what little I could see, the man did not appear to be a college guy, and certainly not anybody that I knew. I kept watching, wondering what was going on. He didn't say anything, but just stood in the doorway looking at me for at least a minute. Then the man opened the door even more and was completely inside my room. He slowly and quickly closed the door behind him. At this point, I was really creeped out. When he was closing the door though, I got a good enough look at him to see that he was way older than most college students. He was at least in his 40s, probably his 50s if I had to guess. The man stood in the doorway for a little while. I was sort of pretending to be asleep, opening my eyes a tiny bit. The room was so dark though that it was hard to see anything, and now that the door was closed, it was even more difficult to see. The man then moved so that he was sort of out of my sight, going behind the end of my bed. I knew that I had to do something. I quickly sat up and reached for the drawer of my nightstand that was next to me. My dad had bought me some pepper spray and gave it to me for protection at college. I had never actually taken it out with me because I didn't think that I would ever need it, so I just put it in my drawer. But now, I was really glad that my dad had got it for me. After I got up, the man heard me and he moved out from where he was. He did not leave my room though. Instead, he started walking closer to me. In the dark, I was desperately fumbling around the drawer through all the junk trying to find the pepper spray. Thankfully, it was open because of course my dad had demonstrated to me how to use it. I finally found it and the man was now just feet away from me. He didn't say anything. He was just walking right towards me kind of slow. I pointed the pepper spray at him, but I don't know if he even saw it with how dark it was. Then I just started spraying. At first, I didn't know if it did anything because the man didn't run away. In fact, he got even closer. He reached out and almost grabbed it out of my hands. Then I started yelling really loud. I kept spraying, and some of it got in the air towards my face, and it definitely worked. When I kept spraying, it started to affect the guy more. I was yelling as loud as I could and spraying pepper spray everywhere. The combination caused the man to finally leave. He quickly ran away and out the door. Then he left. I went over and locked the door, and for a few minutes I was too shocked to do anything. It all happened so fast, and I was shaking from the experience. Soon there was a knock on my door. I didn't want to answer it and was still holding the pepper spray. Then I heard a voice say, "Campus safety." Only then did I go over and look through the door. I saw that it was in fact a campus safety officer. I answered, and he said that there was reports of loud yelling and wanted to know if everything was okay. I told him what happened, and he ended up contacting the police. There was a search for the guy, but he was not found. I still don't know who he was. That was the only time anything like that happened to me in my time at college. I'm really glad that my dad got me that pepper spray. This happened on the last day of school, my junior year of high school. It's something that I remember from time to time, and it's just really weird. I still wonder about it. I don't know if you will find this to be super scary, but I think it's just really odd, and when it happened, it sort of freaked me out. So I went to about an average-sized high school. If my memory is correct, there was about 300 kids in each grade, so roughly about 1,000 total students. I knew pretty much everybody in my grade, or at least knew of them. I also knew most of the students in the grades surrounding mine as well. When you spend that much time at a place every day, you recognize people. So, on the morning of the last day of school, I got there like any other. I drove my car to and from school every day. It was an old car, which was also my first car. I couldn't afford the parking pass for the student parking lot, so I would park my car down in this free parking lot that the school had. It was farther away and by the baseball field and surrounded by woods on two sides. When I got inside of the school, my habit was to go to my first hour class early. I would typically sit in the classroom and drink coffee and go on my phone. I was always tired after waking up for a while, and I was never one to be out in the hallways talking that early. My first hour class was a history class, and even though the classroom would be open, the teacher was never there until right before it started. He would typically talk with other teachers in the lounge, and then would come in the classroom like 2 or 3 minutes before it started. I was also typically the first person to arrive at the class. So I got there this morning and noticed this girl sitting at one of the desks in the back. I didn't know who she was. She was the only person in the classroom other than me now, and I had never seen her before. She had dark brown hair and was somewhat tall and appeared to be around my age, maybe even older. She was just sitting there, but she wasn't in my class. I knew that for a fact. I thought that she might be a senior or something. She didn't say anything or even look at me when I entered the room. I sat down at my desk, which was a couple of rows in front of her. I did my normal routine of drinking coffee and going on my phone. It was dead silent in the room, and it got kind of awkward. She wasn't taking a test or anything like that. She wasn't doing anything at all, it seemed. Of course, I couldn't see her from where I was sitting, but when I had arrived in the room, it didn't look like she was doing anything. I decided to say something to be friendly and break the silence. So I said, "Last day of school, finally." She said nothing at all. After a few seconds, I turned around to look at her. I was going to ask her who she was, but before I could, like right when I turned around, she got up and walked right out of the classroom rather quickly. I remember that she had a really serious look on her face, and that stopped me from saying anything. It was strange, but I just brushed it off. Soon after, some of the other students started to arrive. Then the teacher got there, and then everyone else, and class started. After that, the school day went on, and it was a typical last day of school, with final tests and in other classes just doing fun stuff. When the school day was over, I talked with some friends, and then left and walked out to my car. I had stayed a little bit later than usual with it being the last day. So when I got all the way down to the parking lot where I parked, it was almost empty. I arrived to my vehicle and then got inside. Before I could back out though, I noticed somebody walking in the parking lot who was walking behind my car now. They were in the way of me leaving, so I had to wait for them to walk past, but they stopped right behind my car and just started standing there. I realized that it was the same girl who I had seen in my classroom, and she was just standing there behind my car, not moving. I couldn't back out, so I sat there waiting for her to pass. I wondered why she wasn't going anywhere. She didn't appear to be doing anything. She wasn't on her phone or talking with anyone or anything. After like a good solid minute, I opened my door and got out of my car. I was going to ask her what the deal was. As soon as I did though, she started to move. She walked away from my car and then went to the right. As she did, I asked what was going on. She didn't answer me or so much as look at me. She walked through a few empty parking spaces and then into the grass. Then she just started walking right into the woods, and there was no path there. So she was just walking into the dense woods in the middle of all the trees and stuff. It was so weird. I watched her keep walking through the woods until she was out of sight. Then I just shook my head and went home. I never saw the girl again after that day. I don't think she even went to my school. So who was she, and what was she doing there? And why did she act so weird? I still wonder those things to this day. This happened about 5 years ago. I work at an upscale hotel in one of my state's most affluent suburbs. Like most hotels, we were struggling during the COVID virus. Our rates had been slashed in half to get guests through our door, and our clientele had shifted from upper-class business people to a mixed bag of characters. It was mostly fine, with a couple of notable exceptions, like this one night I worked. I was working overnight alone, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. About 3 hours into my shift, I got a call from room 235. He had a strange voice. It was quite raspy, and he maybe even had an accent. He told me that he couldn't figure out how to work the remote to his TV. I assumed maybe the batteries had died, but he insisted that the remote worked fine, and he just didn't understand how to operate the volume button. I found this strange. I've worked in hotels for 5 years, and have never once encountered someone who didn't understand the TV remote. I gave him the benefit of the doubt though. Also, working in customer service, you come to realize that people are much, much dumber than you would want to believe they are. Since I was alone at the hotel and not technically supposed to leave the front desk, I told him that if he came down to the lobby, I would gladly show him how it works. This upset him. He grunted and started complaining that our customer service was terrible, and what kind of a hotel wouldn't have an attendant come to the room for something like this? I gave in, as he was only 1 floor up, and it couldn't possibly take that long to show somebody how to change the volume on a remote. Everyone was checked in for the night already, and it wasn't worth the argument over the bad review later. I told him I would be up in just a moment. I knocked on his door and did the customary call out, "Guest services." I could faintly hear him talking to someone, but it was muttered, and I couldn't pick up any distinguishable words. At first, I felt like he was instructing someone else to get the door, and I anticipated it to open shortly after. The talking went on for so long, though, that I wondered if maybe the people in the room hadn't heard me. I was debating knocking again when the deadbolt slowly unlatched. Normally, when I go to a room, the guest opens the door wide and stands to the side to let me in, or at the very least opens the door enough that I can fully see them and they can fully see me. Not this guy, though. He barely cracked the door, opened it maybe only an inch. Even weirder, all the room lights were off. It was entirely dark except for the very faint glow of his TV, which was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. His voice sounded exactly like it had on the phone, raspy and whispered. He was standing behind the door, so I couldn't see him at all. Completely disembodied, he instructed me and said, "Come inside, sweetie." I said nothing and didn't move. I was a small 5-foot-tall woman with a baby face in my mid-20s. The man repeated, "Come on, come inside." He sounded more edgy and more insistent this time. It felt so obviously like a trap that if I wasn't absurdly on edge, I would have been insulted. How naive did he think I was? I pushed the door open, but remained as much in the hallway as possible. I also took the opportunity to reach for the light switch just inside the door. The lights came on, and I finally got a look at him. He was at least 60, white-haired and slim, and he was shirtless. He was wearing pants, but the belt was undone, and the ends were flopping down. I'm not entirely sure because I tried not to look, but I believe his pants were also unzipped. He appeared to be completely alone in the room, with the only piece of luggage being a small black duffel bag. I tried to explain the volume switch from where I was standing awkwardly in the doorway, but he wasn't comprehending it, or at least he was acting like he wasn't. I asked him to give me the remote so that I could show him, but he backed further into the room and said, "You know, it'll be easier for both of us if you just come inside." I was not going to step any further into that room, so I gave him one last description of where the volume button was on the remote and promptly closed the door. I felt like I was potentially going to be in harm's way while I was standing in the doorway and he was actively being a creep, so I left. I got downstairs to my lockable office with my security cameras, which would have allowed me to see him coming. I was just anxious and on high alert. I had decided that if he called again, I obviously wasn't going up, and if he came to the desk, I would have 911 punched into my cell phone just in case. The hotel is 2 minutes from the police station, and there's usually a patrol car hanging out in our shopping center. They show up quickly any time I have to call. The man did end up calling me again that night about 2 hours later around midnight. He wanted me to come up to his room again. This time, I told him if he wanted help to bring himself and the remote to the front desk, and I was not going back up there again. Thankfully, he never came down to the desk, and he didn't bother me for the rest of the night.
I picked him up in Porter Square, just like any other fare. He slid into the back seat, calm, polite even, and asked if we could make a quick stop at a bank on the way. Nothing unusual about that. People run errands all the time. So I pulled into the East Cambridge Savings Bank on Highland Avenue. He said he wouldn't be long. I left the meter running, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel, staring at the clock. A few minutes passed. I remembered thinking he was taking longer than expected. Something about the way he had rushed inside nagged at me, but I brushed it off. Then he came back, moving fast, a little out of breath. He slammed the door shut, muttering something under his breath. His hand shook as he fumbled with his jacket, stuffing something inside. "You all right?" I asked, half turning. Yeah, just go," he said, his voice tight. That's when the first siren sounded in the distance. I hesitated. A strange unease creeped over me. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his knees bouncing rapidly. Something wasn't right. But I was just a cab driver. It wasn't my job to ask questions. So I pulled out of the parking lot and merged into traffic. We didn't get far before the sirens multiplied. Red and blue lights flooded my mirrors. My heart slammed against my ribs. I pulled over, my breath coming in short bursts. The squad cars skidded and stopped around us. Doors burst open, officers moving fast, weapons drawn. "Step out of the vehicle. Hands up where we can see them." My stomach dropped. I raised my hands, fingers trembling. My mouth was dry. My mind raced. I wasn't resisting, but I was confused as hell. This had to be a mistake. I was just a cabbie. What the hell was happening? They yanked open my door, dragged me out onto the pavement. Rough hands patted me down, my pulse thundering in my ears. I barely registered the suspect being hauled out behind me until I heard him shouting. "I didn't do anything!" he screamed. "I just needed a ride!" Then I saw them pull a backpack from my back seat, unzip it. Bundles of cash spilled out onto the asphalt. Stolen money. Bank money. It hit me like a freight train. He had robbed the bank while I was waiting. Walked in, demanded money, stuffed it into the bag, and then strolled back into the cab like nothing happened. I had become an unwitting getaway driver. I had no idea. I kept saying, and it was the truth, my voice shook, "I swear I didn't know." The guy just shook his head, muttering over and over, "My wife is gonna kill me." I can understand that. The officers kept their guns trained on us until they were sure we weren't a threat. They cuffed him, stuffed him into the back of the squad car, and left me standing there, breathless, in flashing lights. I gave my statement, told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. They believed me, but it didn't change the fact that for a few minutes, I had been at the center of a crime scene. The FBI was working with Somerville police on the investigation. Me? I can't stand to believe it happened. One minute I was doing my job, and the next I was inches away from being arrested for something I didn't do. That's the part that sticks with me, how close I came to losing everything. I don't think I'll ever pick up a passenger the same way again.
This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone. Before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. My grandma would drop me off at around 3 p.m., and my parents would be home around 4:30 p.m. Not that big of a deal. Today, for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, and my mom, a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at the school. This happened in early fall, so it wouldn't even get dark until like 8:30 p.m. I did what I usually did when I got home. I ran upstairs, got my Xbox 360, and played Minecraft with my friends. That day, it was just me and my friend Seth. I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. Nobody should have been home there until about 7 p.m. My house is set up to where the upstairs has windows that look over my driveway. So with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. Maybe my dad got home earlier than expected. I looked outside. It was a red truck. Nobody that I knew drove a red truck. The person pulled into the middle of my driveway sideways like he owned the place. When I looked out of the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so nobody should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma. By the time I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up my walkway to the front door. I thought that maybe it was one of my dad's friends, or somebody who my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if somebody was going to be coming over. Soon after, I heard a knock at the door. I went to my other window that had a better view of the walkway up to the front door. I saw the guy walking back down the walkway. I switched to looking through the windows overlooking my driveway. I was relaying all of this to Seth with my mic still on. The man walked past his truck and tried to open my garage side door. At that point, my heart sank. I told Seth that this guy tried to get into my house. Mind you, it was literally broad day at like 5 p.m. Luckily, the garage side door was locked because sometimes we forgot to lock it. After he tried the door, he started walking to my back patio. I dropped my headset and I quietly ran downstairs to see what he was doing. I got downstairs and stood behind the wall so I wouldn't be visible to the back door or living room windows. I just listened. I heard him trying to open the door. Then I heard a thud. It sounded like he dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I was more scared than I had ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen. I would have to cross the living room to get there, and he would be able to see me if I went into there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner, and he was gone. I ran back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I was telling him this, I heard a car door shut. This time when I looked out the window, he finally got back into his truck. I looked at the truck closer and noticed the only things he had in his truck were a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes. During this time, Seth told me to get my iPod and take a picture of his license plate, but he was parked where I couldn't see it. Then he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I got to the back door and saw that the doormat was moved. Both large plant pots had been moved as well. He was looking for a key, and we did have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller plant pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch, and all those pots looked like they had been moved too. I don't know what I could have done if he was able to find the key or if he just broke in. After he left, I called my dad and told him what happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. The guy never came back. This happened back when I was in high school. I was a junior and I was really excited for the school year to be over and it to officially be summertime. In my classes, a few of them had final tests, and others we didn't do anything. In the second to last class of the day, it was geography. We had completed everything for the semester, so we were just watching a movie. We were all waiting for the school day to be over at that point. I don't recall what movie we were watching, but I saw a lot of movies in high school. I just remember that we were watching it on the teacher's smartboard. Out of nowhere, the screen went black for a second. Then, with an all-black screen, these creepy messages started coming across. The first thing it said on the screen was an expletive about the high school. Then the text changed and said, "I can see you all." After that, it started saying more weird stuff like that. I don't recall everything. It was kind of like a slideshow on the screen, where it was all black except for the words, which were in some generic font. It was honestly kind of creepy and unsettling. Everybody thought that it was really strange. At first, I figured that it was a prank. It made sense for some kids, probably seniors, on the last day of school to hack into one of the computers and do this. It was still really weird though. When all the students, including myself, saw it, a few said something. The teacher saw it too, and after like 30 seconds or so, she tried doing stuff on her computer. She didn't know what was going on. It didn't stop. Then she ended up restarting her computer and the smartboard. At first, that seemed to work. But then, like right after we started the movie up again, the words came back. It was like somebody was hacking into the smartboard. I didn't know what was going on, and the strange words appeared on the screen again. They started to get more threatening. I remember one of them saying something like, "You better watch out," and "Everybody be careful." As it kept going, the teacher ended up unplugging the computer and the smartboard from the wall. She then said that she was going to see what was going on, and we could talk amongst ourselves but behave. Then she left the classroom. We were all talking about it, wondering who had done it. The messages had been very cryptic, and to me, I still thought that it was probably a prank by some students. The teacher was gone for at least 5 to 10 minutes. When she came back, she didn't say much. She just said that we were going to just hang out for the rest of the class period and not watch the movie. Then she started talking with us about summer plans and things like that. In the midst of that, all the lights went off. This was really strange. I didn't know what was going on, if somebody was messing with us or what. The power had basically gone out in the classroom, and the teacher then got up and said she would be right back again. She left the classroom only to return like a minute later. She said that all the power in the school had gone out. There wasn't a storm going on or anything, so I didn't know why. Then she also said that the school was now in a lockdown. I went from thinking it was a funny prank to actually feeling worried. The mood in the classroom went down considerably. We all sat there in the dark and waited. It got really quiet in the classroom. Not long after that, the lights did come back on, but the lockdown was still in effect. The lockdown ended up going past the normal time of when our class would be out. It was very confusing. Finally, the lockdown ended. We were let out of that class and went to our final class of the day for a shorter time period. Not much was said about the lockdown. At the end of the school day, we all went home for the summer. I tried to find out what on earth had happened. The only thing that I found out was that it was not a prank by some students. It had happened from somebody who did not attend the school. That's really the only thing that I ever knew about it. I continued to go to the school and I graduated from there. Nothing else was ever really said about it. To me, that experience still seems really creepy. It was just so unsettling to see those texts over the screen. I still want to know who was behind it. I work in a nursing home, and my schedule consists of days, evenings, and nights. It's a rough transition between days and nights, but everyone that works there has the same shifts, so we just get through them together. The building has about 100 residents with 3 floors, and is shaped like an L, with a north and south wing, and the nursing stations in the middle. The 3rd floor currently only has a few residents living there due to construction, with one of the wings completely shut down because they're ripping out the walls. Due to only a few residents being on that floor, only one nurse is required to be on duty on that floor. I've worked the night shift alone on that floor many times, and never really experienced anything scary or weird. Sure, it's creepy and dark at night, but that was it. I've also never believed in the paranormal at all. I had the mindset that I had to see it to believe it. A few of my coworkers over the years had talked about how the 3rd floor was supposedly haunted, and they would hear knocks at night and see weird things. I was always intrigued to hear about it, but would always just laugh it off. But one night, a few weeks ago, has really started to change my mind. I was sitting in the nursing station watching movies and playing on my phone. I had just done my rounds and had answered a call bell. I had felt off that night and constantly had the feeling of being watched. I also kept on thinking that I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye. The next part is hard to explain, but I'll try as best I can. As I was sitting there, suddenly a shadow dropped from the ceiling and hovered over me, but by the time I realized what I was seeing, it was gone. My heart jumped, and I jumped out of my chair. There was no way that it would be a shadow from anything or a car passing by, as the only window looks out into the forest with nothing but trees for miles. After a few moments, I calmed down and left the nursing station to go check on my residents. Nothing seemed amiss, and none of them were awake, except for the little old lady at the end of the hallway watching her TV shows. As I walked back over to the nursing station, I was sure that I saw feet or a shadow moving under the crack of the door leading to the wing that was closed for construction. I opened the door just to make sure that it wasn't a wandering resident from another floor, which happens quite often, but there was no one there. I walked back to the nursing station freaked out, still feeling like somebody or something was watching me. I settled back into my chair and tried to watch TikTok videos to get my mind off of it. I was sitting with my back to the window facing the door. After about an hour of watching videos, I glanced at the clock. It was 3:03 a.m. I remember being slightly annoyed, as my coworker had promised to come up at 2:50 so I could have my break and go out to my car to have a smoke. Suddenly, I heard 3 knocks on the window behind me. I jumped up and looked out of the window and saw nothing there. Flight mode took over, and I just darted down the hallway, running into my coworker who was just coming up the elevator. Now, bear in mind I was on the 3rd floor, which is pretty high up. There was no stairway, tree, or ladder outside that window, so it was impossible for a person to be outside knocking on that window. I immediately asked my coworker if she knocked or heard any knocking, and she said no. She could see how shaken up I was and offered to switch floors for the remainder of the shift. I was very thankful, as being on the 2nd floor means you're with another nurse, so I wouldn't be alone. I went out to my car and had a few smokes just to try to calm down. I talked to the nurse on the 2nd floor, and she didn't seem too surprised. She's heard knocking up on the 3rd floor and had seen and heard weird things that she can't explain. A lot of people have died up there, and after that night, I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. I've never felt fear like I did that night, and I've since worked a few night shifts up there and didn't experience anything like that again. Could it be that I was just tired? I don't know, but I'll never forget how I felt that night.
The security footage plays on a loop in my head. Camera B17. Mall Level 3, 15:42:37. I've watched it 14 times now, each viewing worse than the last. The timestamp in the corner blinks with a mechanical indifference as crimson life bleeds out on fresh polished tiles. I was monitoring the feed when it started. Saturday afternoon rush. Hundreds of shoppers caught in the crossfire of something none of us saw coming. The first sign wasn't the screaming. It was the sudden shift in the crowd's movement, like a school of fish sensing a predator. They all turned at once. Everyone could feel it in the air, like a malevolent miasma of ill intent and violence. 15:42:13. First visual of the suspect, male, early 20s, wearing a black puffer jacket. Nothing remarkable except for the look in his eyes. I've watched enough feeds to know that expression. The 1,000-yard stare of someone who's already committed to what comes next. The look of a man who knows what he wants to do and has no qualms on whether it was right or wrong. 15:42:19. He reaches into his jacket. None of the shoppers notice anything though. They just continue. 15:42:24. The blade catches the fluorescent lighting. Combat knife, serrated edge. At least 8 inches. It doesn't look real under the mall's cheerful lighting, like a prop from a movie. Until it isn't. 15:42:37. First contact. The girl in the blue dress doesn't see it coming. She's typing on her phone, smiling at something on her screen. The blade goes in just below her ribs, angled upward. The phone clatters onto the ground. The screen still lit with an unfinished message. Blood blooms from the wound that spills onto the floor in rivulets. 15:42:42. The crowd realizes. The screaming starts. Everyone stampedes away from the man with a knife. He stares after them with a wicked grin, knife held in front of him. 15:43:01. Mall security arrives. They face off against the suspect, hands on their batons. He makes no moves to run away. He just stares back at the security. Then he does something very bizarre. He squats next to the girl and stabs her. She tries to crawl away on weak knees. He ignores her and dips his knife into the pool of blood. Then he licks it off the knife. 15:43:17. The suspect turns towards camera B17 for 2 seconds. He stares directly into the lens. His face is flecked with red, but his eyes are clear, empty. He mouths something I can't make out, even after 14 viewings. 15:43:46. Armed response arrives. 3 shots, center mass. The suspect falls next to the girl, their blood mixing on the Italian marble floors that maintenance had polished just that morning. The cleanup crew use industrial-grade cleaners, but you can still see the stains if you know where you're looking. Trace outlines of what happened, ghosted into the grout. I've memorized their locations. Camera B17's blind spots. Tomorrow, I'll go back to monitoring the feeds. Watch shoppers walk over those same tiles, oblivious to what the security cameras remember. But I'll keep counting. 15 viewings, 16, 17. Looking for the moment I should have seen it coming. The warning sign hidden in the crucial 24 seconds of footage. Camera B17 keeps watching, its red light blinking like a metronome, counting down to the next time something slips through our nets. The timestamp reads 15:42:37.
When my brother and I were around 12 years old, in like 2006, we were at my dad and stepmom's house in the afternoon, probably around 3 p.m., so still broad daylight. My brother and I were the only two people home because my dad, stepmom, and younger siblings were in a nearby town for their youth soccer game. The two of us were lounging in my dad's room, which was located at the back of the house, and watching a movie when we heard a knock on the front door. My brother and I grew up with our single mom, and we were latchkey kids, so being home alone and having people stop by wasn't concerning or weird for us, especially back in those days where it was more common for friends to drop by your house to see if you were home, since not every kid had a cell phone to keep in touch. But on this day, we were at my dad's house like I said, and I didn't know anybody in the neighborhood, so the knock on the door was weird since none of our friends or relatives lived nearby to come over randomly. Both of us wanted to ignore the knocking and wait for the person to go away. But being latchkey kids in a house where it wasn't normal for people to stop by unexpectedly, my instinct was to go and make sure that the door was locked. We knew better than to go out and make our presence known, and we for sure were not going to open the door. But in my mind, there was no getting around one of us going to make sure nothing was unlocked. I knew my brother, and I could tell that he wasn't going to do it, so I volunteered because it was an overwhelming priority. I got up and stealthily creeped down the hallway leading from my dad's room to the front door. There was a window next to the door, so I crouched around and very carefully peeked between the blinds before I reached out, twisting the door lock as silently as I could. It had been unlocked, so I'm very glad that I went to check. When I was peeking out the window, I saw a middle-aged man, slim and tall but not huge. He was bald on the top, with some short salt and pepper hair wrapping around the sides of his head. He had his hands behind his back. I can't recall if it was one hand or both, and in one of his hands was a metal object that I took for a knife, but to this day I can't say for sure what he was holding. He did not see me looking at him through the window, or if he did, he at least didn't look at me and let me know that he knew I was there. The way our house was designed, the front door was not visible from the street because there were bushes and tall trees blocking it. My 12-year-old heart sank knowing this random guy was at the door with what I thought was a knife behind his back, or at the very least a metal object that the man felt was necessary to put behind his back. It was especially terrifying because I recognized it was not super unrealistic since the man would not be visible from the street, and therefore he could hide something behind his back without worrying about the neighbors' cars passing by seeing him. This house would be a good target for somebody looking to do bad stuff, since you'd be shielded from being seen. At this point, normal paranoia became full-on fight-or-flight panic mode. It was like a switch was flipped from me just checking to see if the door was locked, to thinking there was a guy with a knife at the door who wanted to kill us. I creeped back to my dad's room and told my brother what I'd seen. He grabbed the house phone. I can't remember if there was one in my dad's room or if he had to go to another room, but before long he was speaking with my dad on the phone. My dad immediately instructed us to let his dog, a Rhodesian Ridgeback, in from the backyard. Let me tell you, in a situation of pure terror, having a big loud dog was the only bit of hope and relief. From there, my brother and I locked ourselves in a bathroom by the front door, not sure why we decided to hide in the closest room to the guy outside. But from inside the bathroom we called 911 while my brother clutched a kitchen knife, both of us crying and struggling to get words out to the operator. While in the bathroom, I heard the front door handle being twisted around, which would have meant that the guy was now trying to enter the house. The bathroom was only about 7 feet from the front door, so I could hear it loud and clear. I have such a vivid memory of us huddling in that bathroom, feeling truly helpless and out of control of what might happen next, with the only comfort being the noise of the dog barking at the front door. If the guy decided to kick the door down, he'd have to deal with a big dog and then have a knife fight with 2 kids. I was really hoping that the dog would hold it down for us, because I didn't like our odds if the man at the door got past him. Before long, the cops arrived, and shortly after, my dad and stepmom got home too. The guy was gone by then, and nothing ever came of it. To this day, my dad's theory is that the guy at the door was his neighbor coming over to complain, because apparently his dog would always bark at the neighbor while he was doing yard work. So my dad thinks the neighbor was trimming the bushes, and therefore just happened to have clippers or something in his hands when he came over to complain. Sounds reasonable enough, but I wish I had asked at the time to see the neighbor, because then I could truly identify him and know what the situation was. Personally, I'm open to my dad's theory, but it always seemed to me that my dad clung to it more for his own comfort, since the alternative would have been a parent's nightmare. If it were the neighbor though, some things didn't make sense. Like the guy conveniently showing up when no cars were in my dad's driveway since they left to go to the soccer game only 20 minutes prior. Seems like coming over when it appeared nobody was home would be a weird thing if you expected your neighbor to answer the door. Also, the guy trying to twist the handle was not a very neighborly act, trying to enter someone else's home while they're gone. Either way, whether the threat was real or imagined by my brother and I, it was very scary, especially if I hadn't got there in time to lock the door. This happened back on the last day of school one year. I was in high school and it was the final day of sophomore year. It had been a fun school year, and the last day of school is always fun. Everybody's in a good mood, and I remember that I was talking to all my friends. When the school day had ended, I did not ride the bus home, but instead decided to walk back. That way I could stay at school longer and talk to my friends some more. I was talking with Sydney, who was my best friend, as well as a couple of other girls. Then, probably 20 minutes after school had ended, I started to walk back home. I had walked home occasionally throughout the school year. It was only about a 15-minute walk to get back because I lived pretty close by. The city that the school was in was pretty average, but the way back home was on a few sidewalks and through a park. In that area was a lot of trees, not necessarily a woods, but a good number of trees and other plants. So when I was walking back, there was really nobody else walking besides me. I started to notice footsteps a ways behind me about halfway back home though. This was just before entering the park. I didn't really know who it was. After getting into the park, I looked behind me, but the path was curved, so I couldn't see the person at all because they were out of view and too far back. I continued walking and wasn't really worried or anything. When I got to a straightaway, I continued hearing the person. After making it to the end of the park, right when I got back to the sidewalk, I decided to look behind me again. When I did, I suddenly heard and just barely saw somebody run off the trail and behind a few trees and bushes. This struck me as very suspicious, because if they were just a regular person walking, then why would they dart off like that, like they were trying to hide from me? I stopped and watched for a few seconds, but they did not come back into my view. So I turned and continued walking, except now I was concerned. They were probably almost 100 feet back, and I had seen them for like a split second. I couldn't tell who it was, but it definitely looked like a man. I was wondering if it was a guy that maybe I knew from school and he was joking around or something. That just seemed unlikely though. As I kept walking, I looked back a few more times. I was pretty close to my street now, but I didn't see whoever had been following me. It's like they stopped where they were when they had gone off the path at the end of the park. I thought that maybe me discovering them scared them off and they were not going to follow me anymore. That is, if they were in fact following me in the first place. I walked back pretty fast and decided to just try to make it home and not look behind me anymore. I was just going to scare myself if I did. So I walked the rest of the way back home and didn't notice hearing any footsteps behind me. When I arrived back, I went inside and was home by myself. My parents were still at work, which was typical for a school day. They were due back home at about 5:30 or 6, so I'd be home alone for a few hours. After making it back inside, I felt a great relief that I was no longer outside walking. I had never felt scared or in danger all the other times that I had walked home from school, not until this day. I looked out of the front window of the house, just curious as to who had been following me. I was kind of making sure that the person had gone. But then I saw someone. There was a man walking down the street who came into my view. He was on the sidewalk and I didn't recognize him as a neighbor or anything. But I did recognize him as the guy who darted off the path when I had spotted him. I hadn't seen the guy's face before, but I had seen the basic colors of the clothes that he was wearing, and this was the same. The man looked to be fairly young, but certainly no high school kid. As he walked down the street, he didn't seem to do anything too suspicious. He ended up going past our house and down the street. I felt much better at that point. Whether he had been intentionally following me or not, it seemed as though he didn't know which house was mine. I went away from the window and then unpacked my school stuff for the year. Then, about an hour later, as I was hanging out inside, I heard a knock on our front door. I was not near the door, but I had a bad feeling about it. I walked into the other room and sort of had a view. I saw the same guy standing there. Instantly, I was freaked out. I went back to the other room and called my mom in a panic. She told me to call the police if I felt in danger. I went back over to the edge of the room to see the guy. He knocked again, stood around, and appeared to be looking around as well. Then he finally walked away. I went over to the window and watched him walking off down the street. I did not call the police now that he was gone. My parents got home within the next hour and the man did not return. After that, I never saw him again. To this day, I wonder if he had stalked me home and what would have happened had I answered the door. Perhaps there was some kind of a logical explanation. I'm really glad that I didn't answer though. I was 19 at the time this took place. I was a Marine and I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. Not too far from my platoon's patrol base was this structure that looked like a castle. Through interpreted conversations with locals, we were able to determine that they believed it was built by Alexander the Great. Whether this was true or not, I will never know, but this place did look ancient. So being Marines, we did the only thing that we thought was prudent at the time. We went out on patrol with the intent of setting up an observation post inside this structure. We took our Afghan border police with us. When we got close to the structure and our Afghans figured out what we were up to, they refused to go any further. Before they left, they kept repeating the same word over and over. I don't remember what the word was in their language, as this was a decade ago and there's no way I can remember that. But what I do know is that they were trying to warn us of evil spirits. We went in anyways, without our Afghans, with the intent of staying there overnight. This place was basically an ancient fort with mud or clay brick walls on 4 sides, with a building in the middle. So we set security, made sure we had comm checks with our patrol base, and that they had an updated position report on us so they knew where we were in case we got into trouble. Darkness fell, and not long after, I went up to take my turn on the wall with my friend. Our job was to watch for anyone that might be trying to sneak up on us or any other Taliban-related shenanigans. Not 20 minutes into our shift was when weird stuff started going down. The entire time there on the wall, I felt like I was being watched from all sides. I turned to see a figure walking along the wall not too far from where we were sitting. I say walking, but it was a robed figure that looked to almost be floating. I turned to my friend to see if he too saw what I did, and he was getting his night vision back on, which was turned off as it was his turn to rest, and when he looked, the figure was gone. We didn't see anything else after that for the rest of our shift. We uneasily finished and went to rest, where I ended up dozing off at some point. I don't know what happened next, but I awoke to a completely black figure literally squatting on my chest. When I went to yell for help, nothing came out, and it was like I had a hand over my mouth. I reached for my knife since I was a machine gunner and I couldn't just grab my machine gun, and I felt like something was pinning my arm to the ground. I tried to squirm free and couldn't move, so I bit down as hard as I could on what felt like a hand in my mouth. At this point, whatever weight was on me instantly disappeared and I could move and talk again. By that point I was freaking out, and my brothers who were around me saw me. My training had kicked in, and I was trying my best to keep quiet and not pass out because I was hyperventilating. My squad mates calmed me down, and after telling them what happened, they all admitted to having the creeps. They also admitted to the feeling of being watched the entire time we were there. None of us could sleep, and we all basically sat back to back for the rest of the night when we weren't on watch. We were pretty freaked out, and so every noise and rustle in the wind made it even worse in the total silence of that ancient fort in the ancient desert. If you haven't experienced the silence of an open desert in a part of the world where there's absolutely zero light and noise pollution, then I suppose it can be hard to understand this. But any noise in a place like that in the middle of the night, in total darkness when you're already alert to sounds of the enemy, is just about the scariest thing anyone can ever experience. I will never experience that kind of fear in my life again, ever. As soon as the sun came up, we left. Everyone was scared, and none of us spoke about it again to each other, as many other patrol that night also had strange unimaginable encounters happen to them. We never went back to that area again, and didn't make it a permanent observation post for obvious reasons. I still suffer from nightmares and sleep paralysis because of my personal experience that night. The scariest part of this whole thing is that I know it was probably just in my head what happened while I was sleeping, but it felt very real.